The California sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Oprah's private studio, casting a warm, golden glow across the carefully arranged set. Everything had been designed to create intimacy. The neutral beige couches positioned at the perfect angle, the soft ambient lighting that seemed to embrace rather than interrogate, and the subtle floral arrangements that whispered comfort instead of confrontation. This was Oprah's domain, where countless celebrities, politicians, and ordinary people had come to bare their souls. The space itself seemed to promise safety, understanding, and above all, the chance to be truly heard. Today, it would host what everyone expected to be another heartfelt conversation, another opportunity for healing through honest dialogue. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Meghan Markle stepped onto the set with the grace of someone who had spent years in front of cameras, though these particular cameras felt different. She wore a cream-colored dress that caught the California light just right, her posture straight but not rigid, her smile present but carefully measured. There was something in her eyes, a wariness that spoke of too many interviews gone wrong, too many words twisted into weapons. "Meghan, thank you so much for being here with us today," Oprah said, rising from her signature chair with that trademark smile that had disarmed thousands of guests before her. Her voice carried that familiar blend of warmth and authority that had made her America's most trusted interviewer for decades. "I know this conversation has been a long time coming." The crew moved with practiced efficiency around them, adjusting cameras and checking sound levels. These were professionals who had seen everything: tears, laughter, confessions, and revelations that changed lives. But today, there was something different in the air, a subtle electricity that made even the most experienced technicians pay closer attention. Meghan settled into her chair, her hands folding neatly in her lap, a gesture that seemed both natural and protective. "Thank you for having me, Oprah," she replied, her voice carrying a slight tremor that could have been nerves or something deeper. "I've always admired your work, your ability to create space for people to tell their truth." The word, truth, hung in the air between them, seemingly innocent but loaded with the weight of everything that had brought them to this moment. Oprah's eyes flickered almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression that suggested she heard more in that word than just gratitude. "Well, that's exactly what we're here for today," Oprah replied, settling back into her chair with the ease of someone completely in her element. She leaned forward slightly, creating that sense of intimacy that had made her famous. "I want to talk about your journey, your experiences, and I want to give you the platform to share your story in your own words." Platform. Story. Your own words. Each phrase carried promise and possibility, but also responsibility. Meghan nodded, her smile broadening slightly, though something remained guarded in her expression, like someone who had learned the hard way that promises could become prisons. The studio lights warmed to their full intensity, cameras found their marks, and in the control room, producers prepared for what they believed would be another Oprah masterclass in empathetic interviewing. None of them could have predicted that they were about to witness something unprecedented, a collision between two of the most influential women in media that would leave everyone questioning everything they thought they knew about truth, accountability, and the price of speaking out. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the cameras had begun to roll. The conversation began smoothly enough, with Meghan discussing her transition from actress to royal life, a journey that millions had followed but few truly understood. Her voice carried the practiced cadence of someone who had told these stories before, yet there was an underlying intensity that suggested each retelling still carried emotional weight. "The thing people don't understand," Meghan said, her voice growing more animated as she found her rhythm, "is that when you're thrust into that level of attention, every single move you make is analyzed, dissected, criticized. There's no room for being human, for making mistakes, for learning as you go." Oprah nodded along with her characteristic empathy, her expression reflecting genuine concern. The studio crew, accustomed to emotional interviews, noticed something different in Meghan's delivery, a sharpness that cut through the warm lighting, a defiance that seemed to challenge invisible accusers. "That sounds incredibly isolating," Oprah responded, her brow furrowing with apparent sympathy. "How did you cope with that level of pressure?" Meghan's posture straightened slightly, her hands gesturing more expressively now. "You find your voice," she said firmly, each word deliberate and pointed. You realize that staying silent isn't protecting anyone. It's just perpetuating systems that need to be challenged. Sometimes speaking up is the only way to create real change. The camera operators adjusted their focus, sensing the shift in energy. This wasn't just a recounting of experiences. This was a manifesto, a declaration of war against forces Meghan saw as oppressive. Her eyes blazed with conviction, transforming vulnerability into something more powerful and potentially dangerous. And the media response to your voice? Oprah prompted, though she already knew the answer would be painful. Relentless, Meghan replied, her voice dropping to almost a whisper before building again. They turned every word into ammunition, every gesture into evidence of unworthiness. They made me the villain in my own fairy tale. And the institution. She paused, her jaw tightening. The institution let them. Oprah's expression remained compassionate, but something flickered behind her eyes. A journalist's instinct that recognized when a story might have more layers than its teller was revealing. The crew continued their work, but the tension was becoming palpable, like a storm gathering strength before anyone noticed the darkening sky. But you fought back, Oprah observed, her tone still supportive, but carrying the faintest edge of something that might have been professional curiosity or professional skepticism. I had no choice, Meghan said, and for the first time, her voice cracked slightly, revealing the pain beneath the armor. When they come for you, you either disappear or you fight. I chose to fight. In the control room, producers exchanged glances. This was compelling television, but something felt different. Charged with an electricity that suggested this conversation might go places none of them had anticipated. It was at this moment that Oprah's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The warmth remained, but underneath it, something sharper emerged. The instinct of a journalist who had built her career on asking the questions others were afraid to voice. She glanced down at her notes, then back up at Meghan, with a look that seemed to carry more weight than before. The studio lighting hadn't changed, but somehow the atmosphere felt different, cooler, more clinical. The crew members, trained to read the subtle shifts in interview dynamics, began to pay closer attention. This wasn't following the expected script of validation and healing. Speaking of speaking up, Oprah said slowly, her voice maintaining its professional warmth but with an underlying firmness that cut through the comfortable atmosphere. I want to address something that's been brought to my attention. There have been some concerns raised about inconsistencies in previous statements you've made publicly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Meghan's posture straightened reflexively, her hands stilling in her lap, and her carefully maintained smile became more fixed, more forced. The relaxed vulnerability she had been displaying moments before evaporated like morning mist. I'm not sure what you mean by inconsistencies, Oprah, Meghan said, her voice carrying a new edge of caution. The collaborative tone was gone, replaced by something defensive and wary. Well, for instance, Oprah continued, leaning forward slightly, a gesture that would normally signal intimacy but now felt more like an interrogation technique. Her voice remained measured, professional, but there was steel beneath the silk. You've spoken about feeling unsupported by the institution, but there are documented instances of support that were offered and declined. Can you help us understand that discrepancy? The word discrepancy landed like a challenge thrown down between them. Meghan's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Not just surprise, but the recognition that this conversation had just taken a turn she hadn't anticipated or prepared for. I think there's been a misunderstanding about what constitutes real support versus performative gestures designed to make an institution look good. Meghan replied, her voice taking on a sharper quality that the microphones picked up with startling clarity. In the control room, the director made subtle hand signals to the camera operators. This was no longer a standard celebrity interview. This was becoming something else entirely. The crew exchanged nervous glances, sensing they were witnessing a collision that none of them had seen coming. The foundation of trust that had been carefully built in the opening minutes was beginning to show its first cracks, and everyone in the studio could feel the shift. What had started as a safe space for sharing truth was transforming into an arena where two very different versions of truth were about to clash. But Meghan, Oprah pressed, her voice maintaining its professional tone but with an underlying firmness that few guests had ever experienced from America's most beloved interviewer. When we talk about truth, we have to be willing to examine all aspects of a situation. I've built my career on honest dialogue, and that means asking difficult questions when they need to be asked. The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. Crew members who had worked hundreds of interviews found themselves exchanging glances, recognizing that something was shifting in a way they hadn't anticipated. Even the usually unflappable production team seemed to sense that the carefully choreographed dance of celebrity interviewing was dissolving into something raw and unpredictable. "I came here because I trusted you," Meghan said, her voice taking on a sharper edge that cut through the warm studio lighting like a blade. "I thought this was going to be a conversation where I could share my experience without being interrogated like I'm on trial." "This isn't an interrogation," Oprah replied, but her own voice was becoming more measured, more deliberate. Gone was the maternal warmth that had made her famous. In its place was something harder, more journalistic. "This is journalism, and journalism means asking the questions that need to be asked, even when they're uncomfortable." "Journalism?" Meghan repeated, her eyebrows rising in a way that suggested disbelief mixed with growing anger. "Is that what we're calling this? Because it feels an awful lot like you're trying to discredit me using talking points that sound suspiciously like they came from the same people who've been trying to silence me for years." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge thrown down in a medieval court. The crew went silent, even the subtle sounds of equipment seeming to pause as everyone processed what had just been said. Meghan had just accused Oprah Winfrey, the woman who had built an empire on independence and integrity, of being a puppet for powerful interests. Oprah's expression hardened visibly, and for the first time in the interview, her famous composure seemed to waver. When she spoke, her voice carried a warning tone that few guests had ever heard, a steel quality that reminded everyone why she had survived and thrived in the cutthroat world of media for decades. "Meghan, I need you to be very careful about what you're implying," Oprah said, each word carefully enunciated. "I have spent decades building my reputation on integrity and independence. I don't take marching orders from anyone." "Then why does it feel like you're reading from their script?" Meghan shot back, her voice rising slightly for the first time. "Why does it feel like you brought me here under false pretenses?" The gloves were officially off. The confrontation was escalating rapidly, with both women now fully engaged in what was becoming less of an interview and more of a battle of wills. The careful choreography of a typical Oprah interview was dissolving into something raw, unpredictable, and utterly unprecedented. "You want to talk about false pretenses?" Oprah said, her voice taking on a steel quality that few people had ever witnessed from the woman known for her empathetic approach. "Let's talk about the responsibility that comes with the platform you've been given. Let's talk about the impact of words when they're broadcast to millions of people." "Don't lecture me about responsibility," Meghan replied, her own voice now matching Oprah's intensity, the polished veneer of media training completely abandoned. "I've lived with the consequences of speaking truth to power in ways you can't imagine." The studio fell silent except for the hum of equipment and the barely audible whispers of crew members who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Camera operators continued filming, but their usual professional detachment had given way to something approaching shock. This was not the carefully managed, emotionally resonant interview that everyone had expected. Oprah leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving Meghan's face. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap at any moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter but carried more weight than before, the kind of authority that came from decades of navigating the most powerful circles in media and politics. "I think we need to take a step back here," Oprah said slowly, "because what's happening right now is exactly what I was afraid might happen." "What you were afraid might happen?" Meghan's voice was incredulous, her composure cracking further with each exchange. "You invited me here, Oprah. You reached out to me." "I did," Oprah acknowledged, nodding slowly. "And I did it because I believed in giving you a platform to tell your story." "But telling your story and avoiding accountability are two very different things." The word, accountability, landed like a physical blow. Meghan's hands, which had been folded in her lap throughout the interview, were now gripping the arms of her chair. Her knuckles had turned white, and her breathing had become more rapid and shallow. "Accountability to who?" Meghan demanded, her voice rising another notch. "To the same institution that tried to erase me? To the same media that twisted every word I said?" "To the truth," Oprah said simply, but the words carried the weight of a gavel falling in a courtroom. "To the millions of people who listened to your words and believed them. to the other women who looked up to you and saw you as a voice for change. The battle lines were now completely drawn, and everyone in the studio knew there would be no easy path back to civility. "I am a voice for change," Meghan shot back, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "That's exactly why they're trying to tear me down, and apparently you're helping them do it." Oprah's expression darkened, her jaw setting in a way that reminded everyone in the studio why she had survived decades in one of the most cutthroat industries in the world. "Nobody is trying to tear you down, Meghan. But when you make claims that affect other people's lives, when you paint pictures that may not be complete, that's not activism. That's something else entirely." "So now you're questioning my activism?" Meghan's voice rose another notch, the careful media training of years completely abandoned. "You're questioning my commitment to social justice?" "I'm questioning your commitment to accuracy," Oprah replied, her voice steady but firm as steel. "There's a difference between fighting for justice and fighting for your own narrative." The words hit like a physical blow. Meghan's face flushed, and for a moment she seemed genuinely speechless. Then, in one swift motion that shocked everyone in the studio, she stood up abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor with a harsh sound that cut through the silence like a gunshot. "How dare you?" Meghan said, her voice now fully raised, all pretense of composure gone. "How dare you sit there and question my integrity when you know nothing about what I've been through?" The sudden shift from seated conversation to standing confrontation transformed the entire dynamic of the room. Camera operators scrambled to adjust their shots, while crew members exchanged alarmed glances. This was unprecedented territory. Guests simply didn't storm off Oprah's set. "I know what you've told me you've been through," Oprah corrected, remaining seated but her posture rigid. "But I also know that every story has multiple sides, and my job is to help people understand all of them." "Your job?" Meghan said, her voice dripping with disdain as she began pacing behind her chair like a caged animal. "Used to be about lifting people up, about giving voice to the voiceless. When did you become another person trying to silence women who dare to speak out?" The accusation clearly stung. Oprah's jaw tightened, and when she spoke, there was a new edge to her voice that cut through the studio's warm lighting like a blade. "Don't you dare question my commitment to women's voices," Oprah said, her voice controlled but dangerous. "I've spent my entire career creating space for women to be heard. But being heard doesn't mean being believed without question. It doesn't mean being immune from scrutiny." "Scrutiny?" Meghan laughed, but there was no humor in it, only raw, bitter anger. "Is that what we're calling character assassination now?" "We're calling it journalism," Oprah replied, her voice cutting through Meghan's pacing like a scalpel. "And if you can't handle questions about your own statements, then maybe you're not ready for the platform you're asking for." The challenge hung in the air between them like a gauntlet thrown down in a medieval court. Meghan's eyes flashed dangerously and she stopped her pacing to face Oprah directly, her entire body radiating fury. "You think I can't handle questions? You think I'm not ready for this platform?" Meghan's voice was now trembling with rage. "Let me tell you something, Oprah. I've been handling questions my entire life. Questions about my race, my background, my worthiness. I've been handling them from people who had no right to ask them. And now you're handling them from someone who does have the right to ask them," Oprah countered, her voice steady as granite. "Because that's what this is, Meghan. This is what real accountability looks like." The studio was suffocating with tension. Every crew member had stopped what they were doing, recognizing they were witnessing something that would be dissected and analyzed for years to come. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every micro-expression, every shift in body language. Oprah leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving Meghan's face. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than it had been all interview, but it carried the weight of a judge delivering a verdict. "But before we finish, I want to ask you one more question." "I don't think I want to answer any more of your questions," Meghan said, but she didn't move toward the exit. Something in Oprah's tone made her pause, like a deer sensing danger but unable to flee. "This isn't about what you want," Oprah said quietly, her words carrying more authority than any shout could have. "This is about what millions of people deserve to know." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Meghan remained standing, her body language screaming that she was ready to leave, but something held her in place. The entire studio seemed to hold its breath. "What question?" Meghan finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Oprah's gaze was unflinching, surgical in its precision. When she spoke, each word was deliberately chosen, carefully weighted. "Do you ever wonder if your need to be right is more important to you than being honest?" The question landed like a bomb in the studio. Meghan's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, hurt, and finally something that looked almost like recognition. The crew watched in stunned silence as one of the most powerful women in media delivered what might have been the most devastating question of her career. For a moment, the entire world seemed to stop spinning. "How can you ask me that?" Meghan said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and something that looked dangerously close to tears. "How can you sit there and question my honesty when you know what I've been through?" Quote, "Because what you've been through doesn't give you a free pass to reshape reality," Oprah replied, her voice gentle but unyielding. "Pain doesn't justify everything, Meghan. Hurt doesn't excuse harm." "I haven't harmed anyone," Meghan said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I've only told my truth." "Your truth," Oprah repeated, the words hanging heavy in the air. "But what about their truth? What about the truth of the people who tried to help you? What about the truth of the family members who couldn't speak for themselves?" Meghan's composure was cracking visibly now. Her hands were shaking, and when she spoke, her voice was raw with emotion. "I can't believe you're doing this to me. I can't believe you're making me the villain in my own story." "I'm not making you anything," Oprah said softly. "I'm just asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe, you're not the only person in this story who deserves compassion." The words seemed to break something inside Meghan. She reached down and unclipped her microphone, the small device falling to the floor with a soft thud that echoed like a gunshot in the silent studio. "I'm done," she said, her voice final and cold. "I'm done with this conversation, I'm done with this interview, and I'm done with you." "Meghan," Oprah called out as she began walking toward the exit, her voice carrying across the studio with surprising gentleness. "This doesn't have to end like this." Meghan paused at the edge of the set, her back to Oprah and the cameras that were still rolling. The silence stretched unbearably, filled only with the hum of equipment and the collective held breath of everyone in the studio. "Yes, it does," she said without turning around, her voice carrying a finality that cut through the air like a blade. "Because some conversations aren't meant to be had, and some truths aren't meant to be questioned." "Every truth is meant to be questioned," Oprah replied, her words echoing in the space between them. "That's what makes it truth." But Meghan was already walking away, her heels striking sharply against the studio floor with each determined step. The sound reverberated through the space like gunshots, marking the rhythm of an unprecedented departure. Crew members stood frozen, cameras still capturing every moment of the most dramatic walkout in television history. As the sound of her footsteps faded into the distance, Oprah remained seated, alone on the set with cameras still rolling and a studio full of people who had just witnessed something that would be talked about for years to come. The warm, intimate space that had been designed for healing conversations now felt cold and empty, forever changed by what had just transpired. For several long moments, Oprah sat in the silence, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. The crew remained frozen, unsure whether to stop filming or continue capturing this unprecedented moment. The studio lights continued to cast their warm glow, but the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. What had been a sanctuary for truth-telling had become something else entirely. Finally, Oprah turned to face the camera directly, breaking the fourth wall with a directness that few viewers had ever seen from her. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but carried the weight of decades spent navigating the most complex intersections of truth, power, and responsibility. "Sometimes," she said, her gaze steady and unflinching, "the most important conversations are the ones that end before they're finished." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the studio, and, by extension, the millions who would eventually watch this moment unfold. "For 30 years, I've sat in this chair and asked difficult questions. I've held space for people to share their truth, to find healing, to discover understanding. But I've also learned that truth, real truth, isn't always comfortable. It isn't always what we want to hear. And sometimes, pursuing it means risking relationships, risking comfort, risking the very platform that gives us voice. Around the studio, crew members exchanged glances, still processing what they had witnessed. Camera operators continued filming, recognizing that this moment of reflection was as important as the confrontation that had preceded it. "What you've just witnessed," Oprah continued, her voice growing stronger, "is what happens when two different understandings of truth collide. When personal narrative meets collective accountability. When the need to be heard confronts the responsibility to be accurate." She looked directly into the camera lens, speaking not just to the audience but to history itself. "I don't take pleasure in difficult conversations. I don't enjoy challenging people who are in pain. But I have always believed, that truth serves everyone better than comfort. That questions, even painful ones, are acts of respect rather than attacks." The studio remained silent, except for the quiet hum of equipment, everyone understanding they were witnessing something that would be dissected and debated for years to come. The conversation that just ended here will continue in living rooms, in social media, in the spaces where people gather to make sense of what they've seen. And that's as it should be, because the pursuit of truth was never meant to be a solitary endeavor. As the cameras slowly faded to black, Oprah's final words hung in the air like a challenge to everyone who had witnessed this unprecedented collision. What does it mean to tell the truth? Who has the right to question it? And what do we owe each other in the pursuit of understanding? The confrontation was over, but the conversation, the real conversation, was just beginning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,